Hey everyone, Clayton King here. Thank you so much for joining us here launching our new little mini series within Wisdom Wednesdays, and that is the due diligence mini series and what to look for and ask for during the due diligence phase of either a long-term lease or an acquisition of a commercial property. So first, let's talk about what is a Phase 1 environmental site assessment, or a Phase 1 ESA, as it's often referred to in our industry. A Phase 1 is as you can see, very lengthy report that is done by a professional that encompasses basically the current and historical environmental condition of a specific asset. So again, mainly what a Phase 1 is it is a non-invasive surface level study of the history of the property. So basically when you're going through a Phase 1 environmental report, right, it's again very in-depth. This one right here is 300 plus pages that I got, believe it or not. And what that encompasses is basically the actual report of what was done by the professional, but it also includes the historical records, the historical aerials of the site, interviews sometimes with adjacent property owners, and also questions that are answered and applications that are often fulfilled with city officials, verifying that there hasn't been historical environmental hazardous conditions on that specific property. So who actually goes out and performs and writes this massive document in front of me? Well, there is environmental engineering consultants that hold proper certifications, that are obviously educated in this area, and those are the professionals that we engage with to obviously create these reports for us. So probably the most common question that we get as brokers is how much does a Phase 1 ESA cost? Typically a Phase 1 will cost anywhere between $1,800 to $2,500, depending on what company you engage with, and other fees if there's travel involved, etc. But just to give you an idea, typically $1,800 to $2,500 is what a Phase 1 ESA costs. So how long are Phase 1 environmental site assessments good for? Well, the answer is typically they're good and have a shelf life for 6 months. If you're involved in a transaction and the seller provides you with an ESA that they had performed on the property 2 years ago, oftentimes when you supply that document, and most times, if not every time, when you supply that document to your lender, they're going to require you to get a new environmental site assessment done during your acquisition. So another common question that we always get as commercial real estate professionals is, should I get a Phase 1 done on my property that I'm acquiring? And in my opinion, the answer is always going to be yes. It's just a good practice. And a lot of times people challenge that and say, well, I don't understand. I have a cell phone store that I'm buying. Why do I need to get an environmental site assessment on that? And again, the reason is because the Phase 1 study goes back historically on the property. So before that cell phone store was built there could have been a gas station or some other type of potential hazardous user on that site that could have caused contamination on your property. So in my opinion, it's always good to get a Phase 1 done during your due diligence process, so you know that you're buying a environmentally clean property. So a question, especially when you're involved in a commercial real estate transaction, is when should I order a Phase 1 ESA? And obviously every transaction's different. It always depends. But typically a phase one will take 4 to 6 weeks to complete. Sometimes they'll be quicker, sometimes they can be slower, depending on if the engineer is backlogged or not. But depending on how much time you have within your due diligence period, typically people study the leases first, the financials. Once all that kind of checks out, then they pull the trigger on getting the phase one ESA ordered. So what happens if a phase one comes back and it isn't clean and there is contamination and hazardous materials discovered on the property? Well, obviously, if you have a good purchase agreement, it should stipulate the remedies within that contract. If a situation like this comes up, oftentimes the buyer will obviously have the option to terminate or work with the seller to get the environmental findings remediated. But typically, the next step would be a phase two environmental site assessment, which actually is an invasive study done by, again, the environmental engineering consultants, where they actually go to the site, they actually drill holes and take further samplings of the actual soil to make sure that there's no damage and how in depth that actual environmental damage is on the property. So who often requires a phase one ESA to be done on a property? Well, if you don't personally want it or are in favor of it, oftentimes lenders will require you to get a phase one ESA done on an asset, again, because they want to know that there's no current contamination on the property and there hasn't been any historical contamination on that property. So what do you do, right, when you get this 300-page document? Where do I go to figure out whether my property is contaminated or not? Well, the good news is usually 6 to 10 pages into this 300-page document, there is an executive summary that most people go to and a conclusion paragraph that basically states whether the environmental engineering consultant discovered or found any hazardous substances or contaminations on that property, or whether the property is clean and there is no hazardous substances or contaminations on that property. So usually 6 to 10 pages within that report. You can go there and find the conclusion relatively quickly. Hey, thanks again for joining me today to talk about phase one environmental site assessments. We're here to provide information and knowledge to you guys. We are not environmental engineering consultants here at King Capital. But if you guys do have more questions or would like to learn more about phase one ESAs, or you're in an acquisition and you would really like to understand this in further depth, we obviously have relationships and connections with environmental companies that do this as a profession, so we are happy to connect you there. But other than that, I hope you found this video of value, and if you did, please share this video with your network. And as always, if you want more information or more knowledge when it comes to commercial real estate, please feel free to visit our YouTube channel, or you can listen to our podcast, the CRE Project Podcast, and we look forward to connecting with you there.
Hey Siri, call King Capital Commercial Real Estate. I'm super confused and I need an expert.
Okay, calling King Capital Commercial Real Estate.